What are you talking about?
How do you spell Osh? Daddy?
Yes?
How do you spell Osh? I put the O already.
OSH.
Who were your parents? I think. Go. Hello, my name is Lee Varner. I am happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Jemiah Janae Tolliver, and I'm also happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Paulina King, and I'm in the house. Where were you born?
I was born in Phoenix City, Alabama.
When were you born?
On October the 19th, 1937.
Who were your parents?
My parents, Will Varner and Louisiana Varner.
Ooh. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 7 brothers and sisters.
Oh!
I did have 8, but one of my brothers died when he was an infant. His name was Benjamin.
Like Benjamin Harry Potter. So Daddy took him. Was life in the USA different when you were younger?
Said what?
Was life in the USA different when you were younger?
Oh yes, much different from today. We lived in what we call a segregated America. Everything was segregated when I was a kid, when I was growing up.
Did you know anyone famous?
Yes, I know Martin Luther King. I knew Jackie Robinson.
He does.
They were famous.
Your turn to Maya.
How do you become a preacher?
How I became a preacher because I was called by God to be a preacher.
Okay. What places have you lived in?
Oh, I lived in the state of Georgia, state of South Carolina, the state of North Carolina, Ohio, and New York.
Wow.
But I also lived in Scotland, in the British Isles, and I lived in Kenya, in East Africa.
Africa. East Africa?
Yes.
What the world?
Okay. Is your life easier now than when you were younger?
Much easier now, because when I was younger, I lived in segregated America. I couldn't go to McDonald's, I couldn't go to Wendy's. I had to go to the back door, and they had white schools for white kids and black school for black kids. So life was very difficult, very different.
Okay. What message do you have for people younger than you?
My message for people younger than me is that you can be whatever you want to be in America, and you should try at all times to do the best you can to improve yourself and to really educate yourself.
That's very.
Alright, good. Alright, Dad. You're 70 years old. What's it like being 70?
Well, you feel like an old man. And I feel like an old man now. I don't feel as sprightly and as alert and physically as strong as I did in my earlier years. I'm beginning to be weak, and my eyesight is not as good, my hearing is not as good, and my health is not as good as it was when I was much younger. So becoming 70 has its rewards, and it also has its backsides.
What are some of the rewards?
Rewards is that you can look back over 70 years of your life, and I know that God has been good to me to allow me to live this long. Because I received the other day a roster of all my college kids who were in college with me in my class.
Right.
And half of them are dead. The same for my high school class. This year is the 50th anniversary of my graduating from high school, 1957. And over half of those kids are all dead.
Wow. How many of those that you went to high school with came out of Opelika?
How many
moved away from Opelika?
Oh, did many. Maybe around 12 or 13 of us moved out. The others stayed there.
Okay, okay. How did you get a chance to move out?
Well, I wanted to go to college, and the only college I could go to at the time was our church college, which was in Salisbury, North Carolina. So I decided to go to North Carolina to go to college.
Okay, so you went to what school in North Carolina?
Livingstone College. Livingstone College is a college started by the AME Zion Church in 1887 during the Reconstruction period in America.
Okay. What was it like on campus?
Well, we were like one big happy family. There were about 1,000 students, and we all knew each other by name. We also knew a lot about where they came from and so on. But most of us were from North and South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, some from Chicago and New York. But wherever the AME Zion Church had churches, they sent their kids to Livingston College.
Well, where'd you go after Livingston, after you graduated?
After I graduated from Livingston, I went to seminary in Atlanta for 2 years. And then after 2 years in Atlanta, I went to Scotland. And I lived in Great Britain and Scotland for 5 years.
You lived in Scotland and Great Britain?
No, Great Britain is in Scotland.
Okay, Scotland's in Great Britain. Okay.
Yeah.
So you lived in Scotland for 5 years.
Yeah.
And did you live near the Loch Ness Monster? Or
No, I went to Loch Ness to see the monster, but I didn't see him. But I lived about 70 miles away from that place.
After Scotland, where did you go?
After Scotland, I came back to New York and went back to Atlanta. And that's why I stayed in Atlanta 1 year. And then I went from Atlanta to Nashville, Tennessee to graduate school. And that 1 year in Atlanta, I met and married Ruth.
Okay, so you got married and then you went to Tennessee?
Well, I married while I was in Tennessee, but she was in Kentucky, and I was in grad school at Vanderbilt University, working on a PhD in African anthropology.
Wow, so you studied African studies, African anthropology.
Yes.
Okay, okay. And after Nashville, you two were married.
Yes, after Nashville, we got married, and we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And I stayed in Cincinnati 2 years before going to Brooklyn, New York, where we stayed for 10 years. And during that time, you and Daniel were born in New York.
What'd you do after New York?
And after New York, we went to Columbus, Ohio, to start a new church. And we stayed in Columbus for 10 years. And after 10 years in Columbus, we moved to Virginia Beach. And we've been here 20 years.
How many churches have you worked with in that time period? Your first church was in
Somerville, Georgia. And my second church was in Greenock, Scotland. My third church was in Atlanta. My fourth church was in Cincinnati. My fifth church was in Brooklyn, New York. Sixth church was in Columbus, Ohio. Seventh church was in Chesapeake, Virginia. And eighth church was in Suffolk, Virginia. Ninth church was in Windsor, Virginia. The 10th church was in Chesapeake, Virginia.
And that's where you are now?
Yes.
Wow. So you've been a minister at 10 churches?
Yeah. In 40 years. I've been a minister for 40 years. And during those 40 years, I pastored 10 churches. And I built one from my living room.
And that was Advent?
Advent.
Hmm. 10 churches, 40 years. I think at one point you told me that they used to call you the little preacher or the little pastor when you were in Opelika.
Yeah, yes. When I started preaching at the age of nine. I was still in high school, and yeah, they called me the boy preacher. And when I went off to college, I was 16 when I went to college. I was still young, so I was still a boy preacher. I preached all over the state of North Carolina for youth day services because they were interested in having a young person speak on youth day.
What was it like in Opelika, I guess in the 40s and 50s?
Life was very difficult for black people. This is when I saw 4 lynchings. When I was 6 years of age, I saw my first lynching. The Ku Klux Klan drug a man through the streets and took him to the highest spot in the city and lynched him. When I was about 6 and a half, I saw my second lynching. And then when I was maybe almost 7, I saw my uncle, father's half brother, lynched. And later on that year, I saw my 4th lynching. They tarred and feathered a man.
How did you reconcile the lynchings that were done by the other Christians in Opelika? As a Christian, how could you reconcile the fact that other Christians were lynching people? That Christians were lynching people?
Well, the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, didn't think of black folks as humans. They had all kind of names, all kind of ideas about us, and they could do it. And they professed one thing and they did another. The white churches closed their doors to civil rights and civil liberties, and they put their religion in compartments. They had a Sunday religion and not an everyday religion. Christianity didn't mean much to them outside of the doors of the church.
If that was the case, then how could you still hold tight to Christianity?
Because I knew another brand of Christianity that was different from what I saw being practiced by white people in America. And I was not going to let white people in America, with all that meanness, cruelty, and primitive, backward ways, determine my Christian faith.
How did you end up with the United Church of Christ, and why the United Church of Christ?
Well, when I was in grad school, I got married, and Ruth was working in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, and so there was a white church in Cincinnati that wanted to do something about the race problem. So they, half of the congregation didn't want to do it, and that half moved to the suburbs. The other half stayed downtown in Cincinnati, and they wanted a white preacher and a black preacher. And after they searched and searched for years, looking for somebody that would be able to work with them, they ended up with me. And I accepted it because it was a real challenge to preach and work in a white church in those days.
You also studied African anthropology. And
I was working on a master's degree in African anthropology, and I was going to eventually get a PhD and return to Africa to work. I had spent 4 months in Africa, and that's what inspired me to want a degree in African anthropology. I had kind of turned my back on the church at that time and said I didn't want to be a pastor. I wanted to be an anthropologist. But when I completed the master's degree, I accepted that job in the church, and it was in the United Church of Christ, and I learned a lot about the United Church of Christ, because the United Church of Christ was the first church in America to speak out against slavery, the first church in America to build schools and colleges for African Americans, and the first church to ordain females, and it was just a liberal church in the time when a lot of white churches were being very conservative. So that's why I got to the United Church of Christ. It really interested me. Because all the first things that they were doing